But we begin tonight with these 5 words from the prosecution in Donald Trump's hush money election interference trial. Your Honor, the people rest. After 15 days and 21 witnesses, the prosecution handed over the reins to the defense, who began making their case this afternoon, beginning with testimony from Robert Costello, a criminal lawyer with ties to Rudy Giuliani. Costello was in talks to represent Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, in 2018, as Cohen faced federal indictment for taking out the very HELOC loan at issue in this case, the one he used to pay off Stormy Daniels for the benefit of the Trump presidential campaign, which the Trump campaign then lied about in their business records. Within 15 minutes of being on the stand, Judge Juan Marchand lost his patience with Costello's repeated audible and visible reactions to the objections to Costello's testimony. And the judge then cleared the courtroom to admonish the witness. If you don't like my ruling, you don't say geez, Marchand said, adding that Costello can't strike anything because the judge is the only person who can strike something. You don't give me side eye and you don't roll your eyes, Marchand said. Costello said he understood, and we'll get to more on the defense's case a little bit later. But first, Michael Cohen wrapped up his 4th day on the witness stand today and his 3rd under cross-examination, which at times was meandering and kind of hard to follow, as Trump's defense attorney, Todd Blanche, focused primarily on Cohen's character, trying to paint him as a liar, a cheat, someone who cannot be trusted, who was just out for revenge and to financially benefit himself. As Blanche wrapped his cross-examination, he tried to land a final blow in front of the jury, asking Cohen, do you have a financial interest in the outcome of this case? Cohen responded, yes, sir. Blanche then asks, the question of today is whether a conviction benefits you financially, to which prosecutor Susan Hoffinger said, asked and answered, Your Honor. Judge Marchand said, I will allow it. You can answer it. And perhaps to Blanche's surprise was Cohen's response. The answer is no. Blanche asked, it doesn't? Cohen added, it's better if he is not for me, because it gives me more to talk about in the future. Blanche spent much of the day air punching, trying to throw multiple theories against the wall with hopes that one will stick for at least one juror, including that Cohen was too consumed with his own business dealings during October 2016, when the Stormy Daniels payment was made, such that his recollections about his calls and dealings with Trump are especially suspect. There was the theory that Trump's payments to Cohen were just part of a retainer agreement as Trump's lawyer. And there was the claim that non-disclosure agreements like the one Stormy Daniels signed are very common and not illegal. During redirect, prosecutor Susan Hoffinger knocked each of these bowling pins down one by one. Hoffinger, were you too busy in October 2016 to finalize the Stormy Daniels payoff with Mr. Trump? Cohen, no, ma'am. Hoffinger, was the $420,000 payment that you were owed as reimbursement, did that have anything to do with a retainer agreement? Cohen, no, ma'am. On the NDAs, Hoffinger, under the circumstances of this NDA with Stormy Daniels that you testified to, was it perfectly legal under those circumstances? Cohen, no, ma'am. She then made sure to clarify for the jurors. Hoffinger, are you actually on trial here in this case? Cohen, no, ma'am. Hoffinger, are you a witness here? Cohen, yes. And again, it needs to be repeated that despite being the one whose prosecution and congressional testimony gave birth to this case, Michael Cohen is essentially battling cleanup in this case against individual one, meaning the case against Donald Trump doesn't rest on the testimony just of Michael Cohen. Nearly everything Cohen has testified to has already been corroborated by evidence entered into the record by other witnesses, documents, emails, text messages, and audio recordings. It's likely that we'll hear a lot about that evidence again by the prosecution next Tuesday, the day after Memorial Day, when Judge Marchand is scheduled closing arguments to begin. Closing arguments could have started later this week, but Marchand ruled this morning that due to the upcoming holiday weekend, he does not want there to be such a large gap between those closing arguments, jury instructions, and the start of deliberations. Joining me now is Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal correspondent, Duncan Levin, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and Lachlan Cartwright, former executive editor for the National Enquirer. He's currently a special correspondent for The Hollywood Reporter. Thank you all for being here. Lisa, let me start with you. Characterize what happened in court today for us beyond what I have said just now.
Well, you've given a really good summary, Joy, but I think what happened today can best be characterized as exhaustion and exasperation, because Michael Cohen was on cross-examination for the third consecutive day. And at times, not only did Todd Blanche's cross-examination seem meandering, but it was really repetitive. There were lots of subject matters that were covered again and again. That having been said, there were a couple of surprises and not ones that were favorable to the defense. So I think the other theme of today is that whatever advantage the defense was enjoying on Thursday afternoon when they closed, that dissipated for them today through two different circumstances. One is that the remaining cross-examination of Michael Cohen really didn't land any punches, and in fact, Cohen got to punch back. And the second is that Robert Costello, who was that other witness that they called today, who was sort of trying to function as Michael Cohen's lawyer despite not having ever been hired by Michael Cohen, he himself was a little bit of a disaster on the stand, as you recognized. And the jury, while they didn't see necessarily Judge Merchan chastise Robert Costello, they saw all the audible and visible reactions that Costello had to being stymied in answering questions that the judge didn't want answered. And repeatedly, Costello tried to talk over the sustained objections or said things like, geez, or rolled his eyes and things like that. I've really never seen a witness behave like that in court. And on demeanor alone, Robert Costello gets a big fat F.
Lachlan, I want to go to you on this because, you know, there was a lot of talk leading up to Michael Cohen all over TV of people saying, oh, he's going to be a disaster. This is going to be horrible for the prosecution. He's got this record of criminality as if he was like a bank robber before Donald Trump made him do crimes for him. You know, I mean, the guy's a lawyer. And I said repeatedly on this show, number one, he's an attorney. So he knows how to act in court. He's been in front of a trial jury before, in front of a judge before. Number two, he's a practiced television guest and host. He hosts a freaking podcast. So I assumed he was going to be a solid witness. Make of it what you will. Michael Cohen's ability to just answer the questions, yes, sir, no, sir, be succinct, get it done. And this guy Costello, who seems to be the witness that a lot of people thought Michael Cohen was going to be.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, Joy, when you juxtapose the two of them. Michael Cohen, cool, calm, collected, under pressure over the last 4 days that he has been on the stand. The defense have been continually trying to niggle at him and trying to get a reaction. And he has been, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. He has been incredibly steady in the witness stand. And then we have Bob Costello come on this afternoon. And within the first 15 minutes, the judge has to ask the jury to leave to admonish him for his behavior on the stand. And if I'm the jury looking at the first real defense witness being Bob Costello and how he behaved this afternoon compared to Michael Cohen, that would not have left a good impression on me.
Duncan, welcome to the show. How unusual is it for a witness and a judge to get into it the way that, you know, we're just reading the accounts of it. I'm sure it was quite dramatic in person. How unusual is that? And in this courtroom, how damaging could that be for the defense case?
Well, they've clearly gotten off to a terrible start here. It's very unusual to be slapped down in this way, but this type of behavior by a witness is one that the defense clearly should have gotten under control far before they ever called him to the stand. You remember Todd Blanche got off on the wrong foot with the cross-examination of Michael Cohen, too, having his first question to Michael Cohen be objected to and the objection sustained right off the bat, because he was asking personal questions about, didn't you call me this and didn't you call me that? The judge is clearly exhausted and exasperated with this defense at this point in the trial. And so it's just they're off to a bad start. This is a witness who probably did not need to be called. They're calling him to basically try to destroy Michael Cohen, but they could try to destroy Michael Cohen just in their closing argument. They don't need to call Robert Costello. Robert Costello is a witness who Michael Cohen already testified on direct examination that he lied to because Robert Costello was going to talk to Trump about whatever Cohen said. So he's a witness that they really didn't need to call. And to get off on this footing, particularly on their first and maybe their only witness, is just a misstep by the defense that was an unforced error.
An unforced error probably because Trump wanted them to do it, Lisa. I mean, it seems like the defense that seems to be the characterization every day, is that they're waging a defense that probably if they had a more normal client, they wouldn't, right? They're just doing whatever Trump wants and attacking the people he doesn't like and sort of trying to belittle them on the stand. The defense has finally begun presenting their case to the jury in the first criminal trial of Donald Trump, and it may not be going exactly as they hoped. The day ended with probably the most dramatic moment in the trial so far, as Robert Costello, a lawyer who once advised Michael Cohen and one of the few witnesses the defense plans to call, was admonished by Judge Juan Marchand for his reactions to objections. The defense has also signaled that they could rest their case as soon as tomorrow, meaning the big question of whether Donald Trump will take the stand in his own defense appears to be unlikely, despite the fact that Trump has repeatedly said that he would testify. So how will he square that? I expect him and his dress matchy-matchy like the boss, red tie wearing emotional support entourage will think of some type of excuse any moment now. Back with me, Lisa Rubin, Duncan Levin, and Lachlan Cartwright. Let's talk about the atmospherics, Lisa. Here's who was in court with Donald Trump today. We'll just put it up, Little Roads Gallery, Alan Wilson, some people you haven't heard of, some congressmen, Andrew Clyde, insurrectionist Congressman Andrew Clyde. Alan Dershowitz, interesting, he was there. A Missouri attorney general candidate was there. Bernie Kerik, who Donald Trump pardoned felon Bernie Kerik. Kash Patel, former chief of staff to the Secretary of Defense, who would probably be in the next administration. Vernon Jones, the sort of Democrat turned really right-wing, wacky Georgia Republican. And actor Chuck Zito, former president of the New York chapter of the Hells Angels. What was that about?
I have no idea what Chuck Zito was about, but, let's talk about the larger atmospherics. There was a moment last week, Joy, on Thursday, where the DA's office was complaining about the disruption caused by members of Trump's entourage basically coming in and out of the courtroom because they were having press availabilities outside during breaks and therefore would miss the beginning of the renewed session. And when they did that, Todd Blanche said, hey, look, I can't control these people. They're just members of the public. I think anybody who has watched the surrogates operation over the last several days understands that this is not just some coincidental gathering of members of the public, but a very tightly coordinated surrogates operation in coordination with the Trump campaign itself. They are selecting who comes to court every day. They have a sense down to the seat of how many people they can fit in their first two rows of the gallery that are assigned to them, and they fit each and every one of them. And they are accomplishing certain objectives each and every time that they call upon people to come here. Sometimes they're asking for people, for example, who are state attorneys general or candidates for attorney general. But that guy who came today, Will Scharf, for example, that you mentioned, he's not just a candidate for Missouri attorney general. He's one of Trump's appellate lawyers. So there are lots of people there wearing multiple hats, but they're all hats that fit into the MAGA world. This is not some disparate assembly of people who just happen to like Donald Trump. So I'm glad that you called attention to that.
And if I could just take you into the courtroom today,
Please.
sorry, Joy. As I'm sitting there, and this is becoming a daily occurrence, we can hear Trump in the hallway, and so we all turn to then see him walk in. And then today, people just kept coming and coming, and it was like, oh, there's Alan Dershowitz. There is Chuck Zito, who was the Hells Angels, led the New York chapter of the Hells Angels, and they just kept coming and coming to the point there wasn't enough room for them to sit. And then it's left up to Boris Epshteyn, one of Trump's legal advisors, to play sort of party planner, party seater, as he then finds more room for them up the end of the courtroom. And to the extent that today they even didn't have enough room to accommodate all of them. So it's become just this circus every day. And you can see that Mershon is growing tired of it, although he hasn't made any kind of order about it. But it is becoming a running spectacle day in, day out. It's almost like, which member of the wannabe Veep squad are we going to get today? And today we were overblown with wannabes.
They also often dress alike. They dress like Donald Trump. Kash Patel, let's play Kash Patel today. He wasn't dressed alike today, weirdly enough. Go ahead. Here's Kash.
Michael Cohen admitted on the witness stand just this morning to 6 different felonies of stealing Donald Trump's money. After 6 weeks of trial, we finally have a crime. We also have a victim. That victim is Donald J. Trump.
They look like a singing group, or maybe like cosplayers who are trying to pretend to be Donald Trump, like Trump impersonators.
Did Kash not
It's
get
very
the
weird.
memo about the red tie? Did he leave his red tie at home
out
today?
Yeah, he's done. I think he's done. Whatever his future was in the Trump administration, done. Not wearing the uniform. Let's play Alina Habba because she didn't wear a red tie. But here's what she said.
Well, he's got to listen to his attorneys. It's not as much what he wants to do. We know he wants to testify. He is willing. It's pretty quick, and it would be a pretty short testimony as far as the questions that would need to be asked, because he had no part in this.
Duncan Levin, it's clear that Donald Trump is not going to testify because, first of all, he would commit perjury on the stand. He's not capable of telling the truth. That's number one. Number two, he would destroy himself because he would get up there and incoherently ramble that he did not sleep with Stormy Daniels and that Michael Cohen is a terrible person and a rat. And he wouldn't be able to stop that because his brain don't work good. So he won't testify. How will he be able to get out and spin that he was told that he can't testify, that his lawyer said he couldn't testify? Because that's not true, right? He has the right to testify.
He said stuff all throughout this trial that does not comport with any reality, starting with the fact that he said that this is all trying to keep him off of the campaign trail, when he has taken every single turn at this trial to make it longer than it needs to be. He's forced the DA's office to call custodial witnesses, the head of C-SPAN, people from the book publisher. He could have gotten a lot of these exhibits in a lot faster. The fact that this trial has lasted as long as it has is in large measure his fault. He said a lot of things that don't comport with any reality. And frankly, because of the gag order, he's earlier said he wasn't able to testify. And the judge made clear you have every right to testify. He's going to say whatever he's going to say out on the campaign trail. And you can be sure that the minute this trial's over, whatever it is, when he's released from this gag order, he is going to start unleashing different types of narratives about it. But he does not really need to testify because what the defense is setting up is this defense that this was something that was cooked up between Alan Weisselberg and Michael Cohen, and that it didn't involve him at all. And he doesn't really need to get on the stand to say that he didn't know anything, because he's going to get eviscerated on cross-examination. The downside to him taking the stand far outweighs the fact that he could say, no, this was about Melania. I wanted to make sure it wasn't about the election. I wanted to make sure she didn't find out about it. It's all belied by the evidence. And I think that all of the other evidence really is going to kill that. And so there's really no reason for it.
And note that Melania is not there, nor any other members of the family. Only the less beloved son showed up just one time. The court, let me just read to you guys now the moment when the court was cleared today. We now do have that transcript. Let me read that to you. And here it is. This is the court. The fact that this is the judge speaking. The fact that I had to clear this courtroom and that the court officers, including the captain, had great difficulty clearing the courtroom, and that there was an argument back and forth between the press and including counsel for the press, goes to why I had to clear the courtroom in the first place. And that is, sir, your conduct is contemptuous right now. I'm putting you on notice that your conduct is contemptuous. If you try to stare me down one more time, I will remove you from the stand. I will strike his entire testimony. Do you understand me? Mr. Bovee, yes, Judge, I understand. This is the judge, Judge Marchand again. Listen to the question and answer the question. The witness, this is the witness. Can I say something, please? The judge, no, this is not a conversation, to which the witness said, okay. Lisa, that was a dramatic moment.
It was, and it wasn't one that we saw, Joy, so I'm really glad that you read the transcript. That transcript happened in a sealed courtroom, as you just noted. That was something that Judge Marchand said only with Robert Costello on the stand and the lawyers in the room, and then the additional people that are there for the DA and for the Trump folks. But no members of the public, and certainly not the press, was there to see that. That having been said, Costello continued to sort of talk over objections and really resist the questions posed to him from the DA's office. He has not been a good witness, even when he was better counseled by Judge Marchand. So let's see how that ends tomorrow.